The emergence of Christianity in human history is not only significant as the appearance of a new religion, but also as a turning point accompanied by profound changes in human thought, societal structures, and moral values. Understanding this faith requires more than just studying sacred texts. It also demands considering the political, social, and psychological conditions of the era that gave rise to it. No religion emerges in a vacuum. It arises as a response to certain needs, fears, and quests. In the 1st century CE, the region of Judea, part of the Near East under Roman rule, was experiencing significant tension. The Roman Empire, as the most powerful political and military force globally, imposed heavy taxes, strict administrative systems, and cultural pressure on the territories it conquered. Meanwhile, the Jewish people sought to preserve their religious identity and their special covenant with God. They believed in the coming of a promised Savior, the Messiah, who would restore justice and put an end to oppression. It was in this complex environment that a man named Jesus appeared on the historical stage. According to sources, Jesus was born into a humble family in the town of Nazareth and lived much of his life as an ordinary person. His teachings were initially spread orally. Jesus never presented himself as a political leader. He spoke of love, forgiveness, mercy, and the need for inner purification. The core of his message was rooted more in the love of God than in the fear of God. This approach represented a revolutionary difference compared to the religious system of the time, which was largely focused on rules, punishments, and formal rituals. Jesus, on the other hand, emphasized personal intentions, the heart, and one's deeds, highlighting that closeness to God begins not only in temples, but within every individual. These ideas posed a significant challenge to religious leaders and political authorities, as Jesus' message made the priests and religious elite, who traditionally acted as intermediaries, largely unnecessary. Gradually, disciples began to gather around Jesus. They shared his teachings with others and proclaimed what he said. However, the growing influence of Jesus was perceived as a threat by both Roman authorities and Jewish religious leaders. As a result, Jesus was arrested and crucified. According to Christian belief, this event was not a defeat but the beginning of a divine plan. Christians believe that Jesus rose from the dead, confirming that he was indeed sent by God. Even after Jesus' death, his teachings were not erased. On the contrary, his followers continued to spread his message with greater dedication and faith. They began to present Jesus not merely as a teacher, but as the Son of God and the Savior of humanity. This stage became a turning point in the historical development of Christianity, as Jesus' identity started to shift from a historical figure to a theological symbol. Paul played a particularly important role in this process. Although he did not personally know Jesus, a mystical experience he underwent completely transformed his life and direction. As a result, he became one of the most devoted and active proponents of Christianity. Paul did not limit Christianity to Jewish communities. He spread the faith to non-Jewish populations as well. His approach was a turning point that transformed Christianity from a local Jewish movement into a universal religion. During this period, Christians constituted a minority within Roman society and often faced persecution. They were considered a potential threat to the state for refusing to elevate the emperor to divine status. Nonetheless, Christianity continued to grow through clandestine communities. One of the key factors in its spread was its message of hope to ordinary people. The faith emphasized that those who suffered, the poor, and the oppressed held value in the eyes of God. This raises an important question. Why did Christianity spread so rapidly? The answer must be sought not only in religious factors, but also in social and psychological ones. In Roman society, people were spiritually empty. The old gods had lost their appeal, and the empire was sustained only by demands for power and obedience. Christianity, however, offered individuals personal identity, moral worth, and the hope of eternal life. The topic does not end here. In the next section, we will explore the official recognition of Christianity, the establishment of doctrines, and the early disagreements that emerged within the faith. The next stage in the history of Christianity was its gradual transformation into an organized institution. In the early periods, Christian communities did not possess a centralized system. They primarily gathered in homes, supported one another, recalled Jesus' teachings, and performed simple rituals. For these communities, faith was more about sharing and a sense of unity than following formal rules. However, as Christianity spread, various challenges emerged. One of the central questions was, who was Jesus? Was he merely a prophet, God's messenger, or God himself? Different opinions arose around this question, leading to serious theological debates for centuries to come. Some groups viewed Jesus as a fully divine being, while others believed he was a chosen human and a prophet close to God. These differing perspectives complicated the formation of a unified belief system. Consequently, early Christianity became a period marked by intense internal doctrinal disputes. By the 4th century, Christianity experienced a major turning point. Roman Emperor Constantine legalized Christianity. This step was not only a religious decision, but also a political one. Constantine recognized the need for a strong ideology to maintain the unity of a fragmented empire, and Christianity had the potential to fulfill that role. During Constantine's reign, Christianity transitioned from a persecuted faith to a religion supported and protected by the state. This change gradually began to influence the very nature of Christianity. Simple communities were replaced by formally organized churches. Bishops, synods, and church hierarchies emerged. During this period, the Council of Nicaea was convened, with its primary goal being to define the core principles of Christian belief. At the council, Jesus' relationship with God was officially articulated, and orthodox doctrine was established. Groups with differing views were labeled heretical and distanced from the central teachings of the Church. This process created a significant paradox in Christian history. A faith originally based on free thought and love evolved from a boundless, informal unity into a religion governed by formal laws and punishments. The Church began to wield not only spiritual, but also political influence. Consequently, Christianity's status as a state religion facilitated its wider spread, but at the same time, the simplicity and human depth of Jesus' original message were partially lost. Jesus emphasized the inner transformation that must occur in the hearts of individuals, yet over time, the Church replaced this idea with external rules and administrative procedures. At this point, a question arises: is Christianity truly built on the teachings of Jesus, or has it evolved over time to conform to political and cultural demands? This question continues to provoke extensive discussion among theologians and historians today. In the next section, the focus will shift to how Christianity's sacred texts were formed, the process of the Bible's creation, and which texts were accepted or excluded. One of the most important and most debated issues in the formation of Christianity is the creation of its sacred texts. The book now known as the Bible is not a single text. Rather, it is a collection of writings composed by multiple authors over different periods, later selected and compiled into one volume. During Jesus' lifetime, no gospel existed, as he did not write down his teachings. His words and deeds were preserved and transmitted orally by his disciples and followers. Although this oral tradition persisted for a long time, over the years, the generation that had personally seen Jesus passed away, and Christian communities spread across broader regions. This created the need to preserve his teachings in written form. The earliest gospel texts began to be written toward the end of the 1st century CE, describing Jesus' life, miracles, teachings, and death. Notably, different gospels portrayed Jesus from different perspectives. Some emphasized his divine nature, while others presented him more as a human teacher. Over time, a large number of different gospels and other religious writings emerged. Texts such as the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Mary, and the Gospel of Judas offered alternative explanations of Jesus' identity and teachings. Many of these writings contained ideas that did not align with the official views of the Church. For example, some emphasized that salvation could be achieved through knowledge and inner understanding. During this period, Church leaders faced difficult choices in determining which texts were divinely inspired and which were dangerous. As a result, the concept of the canon emerged. The canon refers to the collection of texts that are officially accepted. After extensive debates and political influences, the 4 Gospels written by Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John were officially recognized. This selection was not random. The officially accepted Gospels aligned with the theological framework the Church sought to establish. The remaining texts were rejected as heretical. Some were destroyed completely, while others were secretly preserved and survived to the present day. All these processes demonstrate that the form of Christianity we know today is the result not only of divine revelation, but also of human will and strategic decisions. Church leaders determined which ideas would be preserved and which would be forgotten, clearly illustrating the connection between religion and authority. Following the formation of the gospel texts, Christianity became a more organized system of belief. Faith was now shaped, analyzed, and taught based on written texts. This change strengthened religious unity on one hand, but on the other, it restricted freedom of thought within defined boundaries. With this stage, Christianity evolved not only as a path of spiritual faith, but also into a comprehensive ideological system. The Church established rules, methods of punishment, and oversight mechanisms to maintain this system. In the next section, the discussion will focus on Christianity's impact on society, how moral values changed, and the role this religion played in human psychology. The spread of Christianity brought significant changes to society's understanding of morality. In ancient times, morality was largely based on laws, customs, and the balance of power. The strong were considered right, and the weak were expected to accept their fate. Christianity completely transformed this approach. For the first time, weakness was not presented as a sin, but as a reason for mercy. In Jesus' teachings, morality was measured more by a person's inner intentions than by external actions. He taught that people are accountable not only for their deeds, but also for their thoughts. This perspective led to profound changes in human psychology. The concept of conscience became more important, and individuals were now responsible not just to society, but also to their own inner world. The notion of sin became central in Christianity. Sin was not merely a violation of laws. It was seen as a breach or neglect of one's relationship with God. This encouraged people to repeatedly examine themselves and engage in inner reflection. As a result, moral discipline was strengthened, but feelings of fear and guilt also increased. At the same time, the idea of salvation acted as a counterbalance to this psychological burden. Christianity emphasized that human perfection could not be achieved through one's own power. Salvation was possible only through God's mercy and faith. This concept provided immense comfort, as it assured people that they would be accepted despite their mistakes and were not constantly forced to be perfect. Over time, the Church built institutional mechanisms around these meanings. The forgiveness of sins became managed through rituals, sacraments, and spiritual intermediaries. Thus, a person's direct relationship with God was replaced and transformed into a new form. This process granted the Church significant psychological and social power. Christian morality also influenced family structures. Marriage was considered a sacred bond, and values such as loyalty, obedience, and sacrifice were especially emphasized. These values promoted social stability while, at the same time, placing certain limits on individual freedoms. The role of women in Christian morality was presented in a contradictory manner. On one hand, there was the ideal of the pure, self-sacrificing woman as a sacred mother figure. On the other, women were depicted as sources of sin and weakness. This dual portrayal deeply shaped society's perception of women for centuries. Christianity also guided collective behavioral norms, not just individual morality. Concepts such as forgiveness, patience, and obedience played a key role in maintaining social order. Authorities often used these values for their own purposes, teaching people that effort in this life was necessary and that ultimate reward awaited in the afterlife. This raises a critical question. Did Christianity liberate people, or did it incorporate them into a new system of moral control? There is no simple answer, as Christianity historically served both as a source of hope and as an instrument of fear. In the next section, the focus will shift to Christianity's rise as a powerful force in the Middle Ages, the Church's role in the political arena, and the consequences of this power. As we enter the Middle Ages, Christianity was no longer merely a religious belief. It had become one of the primary forces shaping Europe's political and social life. With the fall of the Roman Empire, the Church filled the political vacuum, and in a period when secular authority weakened, spiritual authority grew stronger, placing the Church at the center of society. During this period, The church was not only a spiritual leader. It owned vast lands, collected taxes, organized courts, and legitimized rulers. For any king to ascend to power, the church's approval was considered essential. In this way, political authority gained official and legal form under the name of God. The papacy became the supreme symbol of this power. The Pope presented himself as God's representative on earth, with the authority to support or punish rulers to guide their behavior. Excommunication, the act of being cast out from the church, was socially and spiritually equivalent to death for a medieval person and was often used as a tool of political pressure. One of the clearest expressions of the church's power was the Crusades. Motivated by religious ideology, the church encouraged people to fight in wars, promising that those who died for God would go directly to heaven. This call led thousands of people to leave their homelands, resulting in massive and bloody conflicts. It is important to note that in Jesus' teachings, there was no place for violence. He fought not with the sword, but with words. Yet the church transformed his teachings of peace and love into a politically motivated instrument to serve its own interests. In this way, a religion founded on principles of love gradually became a religion based on power. The church's influence was not limited to warfare. Strict control was exercised over science and thought. Ideas contrary to the church's teachings were labeled heretical, and those who promoted such views faced various punishments. The Inquisition was the harshest expression of this system of control during that era. However, Christianity in the Middle Ages did not play only a negative role. The church played a crucial part in preserving and advancing literacy, establishing hospitals and schools. Monasteries acted as centers of knowledge, fostering progress in various fields. All of this demonstrated Christianity's dual role throughout history, both as a powerful moral authority and as a system of social control. Toward the end of the Middle Ages, this power increasingly came under scrutiny. Society began to notice the stark contrast between the church's wealth and Jesus' humble, simple life. This dissatisfaction laid the foundation for the significant changes that would follow. In the next section, we will explore the Reformation period, the uprisings against the church, and the process of Christianity's fragmentation. With the transition to the 16th century, a new and influential era in Christian history began, the Reformation. This was not a sudden uprising against the church, but rather the open expression of years of accumulated discontent, questions, and contradictions. People began to think critically. Was it truly necessary for so many intermediaries to stand between God and humans? At the core of the Reformation was the church's misuse of both material and spiritual power. One major point of contention was the sale of indulgences, promises of forgiveness in exchange for money, which caused significant dissatisfaction among the public. This practice turned faith into a commodity and directly contradicted the teachings of Jesus Christ. A central figure in this movement was Martin Luther. In challenging church authority, Luther emphasized that his struggle was not against God, but rather an effort to free faith from the church's monopoly. His idea was simple yet fundamental. Salvation comes through faith alone, and church rules or ritual observances do not guarantee it. Luther's ideas spread rapidly, largely thanks to the newly developed printing technology. The Bible became accessible not only to clergy but also to ordinary people, undermining the church's complete control over religious thought. The Reformation had both religious and political consequences. The church's unified authority in Europe began to fragment and weaken. A new Christian denomination, Protestantism, emerged, and the deep theological differences between Catholicism and Protestantism eventually led to wars and bloody conflicts. This historical phase marked the end of Christianity as a single monolithic voice. The same religious texts were interpreted in different ways, and conceptions of God took various forms. This process granted people intellectual freedom, but also caused societal division and conflict. One of the most notable effects of the Reformation was the emphasis on individual conscience. People were now directly and personally accountable to God. This idea laid the foundation for the development of human rights, individual liberties, and secular thinking in later centuries. Thus, Christianity underwent a significant transformation. The faith did not fully return to its original simplicity, nor did it maintain its previous absolute power. Instead, it adapted and reformed to meet the needs of its era. In the next section, a general overview will be presented of Christianity's place in the modern world, what this religion communicates to people today, and what lessons can be drawn from its history. In the modern era, Christianity is neither the persecuted faith of the Roman Empire nor the absolute power of the Middle Ages. Over time, this religion has changed, fragmented, been reinterpreted, and confronted the realities of the contemporary world. Science, technology, and secularism have fundamentally altered humanity's relationship with God, moving it to a different plane. For many people today, Christianity is more often regarded as a cultural and moral heritage. Even those who do not attend church live according to values shaped by Christianity. Principles such as forgiveness, compassion, support for the weak, and conscience. These principles are now embraced not only within a religious framework, but also as universal human values. At the same time, modern individuals ask more questions. The concept of God evolves, claims of absolute truth are questioned, and the act of believing requires a more conscious approach. People no longer simply accept without thinking. They seek understanding, ask questions, and make their own choices. In a curious way, this approach aligns with Christianity's original message, as Jesus also directed people to think and seek understanding rather than providing ready-made answers. Although today's church may no longer hold the same authoritative voice, Christianity's influence remains strong. Its traces can be seen in art, literature, legal systems, and human rights. The idea that human life and each individual's spiritual value are supreme remains a legacy of Christianity's deep philosophical impact. Here, the fundamental question arises again: what is Christianity? Is it an institution, a belief system, or a way of thinking? History shows that different eras have answered this question differently. At times, it has been a source of hope, at others, an instrument of fear. Sometimes it opened the door to freedom, other times it imposed chains and restrictions. This may be Christianity's greatest paradox. At its center stands one figure, Jesus, symbolizing simplicity, vulnerability, and opposition to rigid systems. Yet the institutions built in his name have sometimes become the strongest and most rigid structures. This contradiction remains unresolved. Perhaps the essential lesson lies here. Religions have historically emerged to transform people, yet over time, humans themselves have transformed religions. Christianity is part of this ongoing progression. It is neither sufficient to idealize it completely nor to reject it entirely. To truly understand this faith, one must reflect on one's own past, fears, hopes, and quests. Consequently, the history of Christianity is not merely a story of the past. It continues to raise a profound question in our present. Who is humanity? What is the relationship between humans and God? And upon which pillars should a spiritual life be built? Perhaps these questions are more important than the answers themselves.